Well, since 1949, Washington's provided Israel with more than $120 billion in financial aid. The annual donation is around $3 billion, sometimes more, sometimes less. Friends don't give non-friends that much money. And surely Washington will never roast Netanyahu over something like this.
This is an anti-Israel administration. It's the first administration in American history that is obviously anti-Israel. It's borderline a Jew-hating administration. There can be no question at this point that the daylight that has been created between the United States and Israel has emboldened Israel's enemies and enemies of the United States.
How do you say that? I mean, that Iron Dome system, Ben, that they are using so effectively in Israel tonight was largely funded in part by the United States, hundreds of millions of dollars under President Barack Obama.
Well, the President of the United States still is going to sign over money to Israel because it's politically unpalatable not to do so.
The truth is, Mr. President, your policy in Israel is unsustainable. The American people are on the side of Israel and Israel's right to defend herself. Mr. President, whose side are you on?
Your father was right. We are all Jews.
After 10 months of talking, Washington has agreed a record $38 billion military aid package for Israel.
This is the single largest pledge of military assistance to any country in U.S. history. It's a reminder of the United States' unshakable commitment to Israel's security.
I'd like to thank President Obama and his administration for this historic deal. I also thank our many, many friends in the American Congress and the American people for their support.
With President Obama in his final year, yay! He may be the worst thing to ever happen to Israel, believe me. Believe me.
Well, let's talk about, Cynthia, there are many reports that talks about the influence of the Israeli lobby, the AIPAC, on United States politics in general. Did you experience anything in that realm as far as what one would call the interference in American policy by AIPAC?
Yes, I first-handedly and also frontally was assaulted by the presence of the pro-Israel lobby to such an extent.
Physically assaulted?
Well, politically assaulted, to such an extent that my father had to ask the question publicly, what does Stone Mountain, Georgia, have to do with Israel? What I was doing was servicing the needs of my constituents, and I was not allowed to do that because I did not toe the line on U.S. policy for Israel.
What line is that they wanted? Were you told directly that you had to toe a line, or explain that to me?
Well, every candidate for Congress at that time had a pledge. They were given a pledge to sign. And I was new on the scene. And so the pledge had Jerusalem as the capital city.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
The military superiority of Israel.
American Congress people have to sign this pledge.
Yes, you sign the pledge. If you don't sign the pledge, you don't get money. So, for example, it was almost like water torture for me. My parents observed this. I would get a call, and the person on the other end of the phone would say, I want to do a fundraiser for you. And then we would get into the planning. I would get really excited because, of course, you have to have money in order to run a campaign. And then 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the planning, they would say, "Did you sign the pledge?" And then I would say, "No, I didn't sign the pledge." And then my fundraiser would go kaput.
So, well, I just want to get into this pledge a little bit more. So this is basically something that is mandatory, that every congressperson has to sign, saying that, what, Jerusalem, you said, is the capital of Israel, and what else?
You make a commitment that you will vote to support the military superiority of Israel.
We will stand up to Iran's aggressive push to destabilize and dominate the region. Iran is a very big problem and will continue to be, but if I'm not elected president, I know how to deal with trouble, and believe me, that's why I'm going to be elected president, folks.
That the economic assistance that Israel wants, that you would vote to provide that.
This isn't a question for the congresspeople serving, that they are representing, or they're supposed to be representing, the people of the United States, not a foreign country, and yet they have to pledge allegiance to a foreign state.
That's what
no one questions this.
That's what I was asked to do. And I made it public. This probably nobody had said anything about it, but I made it public, and then, you know, the excuse was, well, you know, those were just overzealous advocates for Israel. So then the tactic changed, and but this is what is done for 535 members of the United States Congress. 100 senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives have to now write a paragraph, which basically says the same thing. So it's not a pledge, but it's a paragraph, and you post it, and, you know, there are these forums you have to go to at the synagogues or whatever. And then, you know, if you don't perform appropriately, then you don't get money to run your campaign. The problem is that it requires an awful lot of money to run a campaign.
Telephone number for those guys that were on the campaign with me during the 2002 election, and I want to get a copy of your tape of those commercials they had run. Give me a call. I'm in office 326-8844. Thank you. What AIPAC did, some members of the United States Congress, rather, they put in resolutions condemning Libya, and they just kept them in the resolutions with Syria and with Iran and with Iraq. They kept putting them in that in resolution, and kept pushing for all kinds of sanctions, all kinds of action against them. And, of course, I voted against the resolution, and others started voting against it. And I think what later I found out, what really made them angry, other members of Congress came to me and wanted to know what was happening, and I was telling them, we're trying to negotiate.
So what happened?
I was looking at CNN. Several people had called me and told me what they had seen and heard, and they told me, look at CNN. And they flooded the radio and TV with commercials. Those commercials, and you have to understand the mode that the country was in. We had just gone through 9/11, and most Americans didn't know Hussein from Gaddafi or Gaddafi from bin Laden. They didn't know the difference. They all saw them as the same. And the commercial, many commercials, put me with them, saying I supported them.
Support and finance international terror network.
It had image of the airplanes flying into the World Trade Center. I tell you, I was dropping rapidly in the polls. We had continued polling. I was dropping rapidly in the polling. I say it was, you have to admit it was well planned and they executed it. Afterthought, it said, my goodness, they had it together. I lost the election.